Hello, good evening. Well, you guys are not going to believe this. Whoever has been following me for a while, you're going to be like, you're kidding. You're going back to that. I have not finished a book reading that I started 10, well, actually, I started it a year ago. Last time I read from this book was 10 months ago. Wow. There's really not excuse for that. And God has taught me, if one of the things I should say in my walk with Him, you finish what you start. That is very, very important. So I'm going to finish reading this book, even though it is a very difficult book to read. I do admit it. It is The Secret History of the Jesuits by Edmond. We are in chapter 21. So let's go slow. The Jesuits and the General Bollinger, the Jesuits and the Dreyfus Affair. The hostility of which the devout party pretended to be the victim at the end of the 19th century from the Republican state would not have lacked justification, even though this hostility, or more accurately, mistrust, had been even more positive. In fact, the clerical opposition to the regime which France gave herself freely showed itself at every opportunity, according to the Abbe Burgat. In 1873, the attempt to restore monarchy with the Count of Chambord failed, even though strongly supported by the clergy, because the pretender stubbornly refused to adopt the tricolored flag, to him the emblem of revolution. Such as it is, Catholicism seems bound to politics, or to a certain kind of politics. Loyalty to the monarchy was transmitted from generation to generation in the old noble families, as well as in the middle classes and the common people in the Catholic regions of the West and South. Their nostalgia of an ancient and idolized regime pictured in an epic Middle Age was coupled with the wishes of fervent Catholics whose main preoccupation was the salvation of the religion. They rallied behind Vuillet, with the legitimate and devout royal family of Chambord, considered to be the form of government most favorable to the Church. Out of the union of these political and religious forces was born, in the strained situation after the war, a kind of reactionary mysticism, illustrated perfectly by Monsignor Pye, Bishop of Poitiers, and its best incarnation in the ecclesiastical world. France, who awaits another chief and calls for a master, will again receive from God the scepter of the universe which fell from her hands for a while, on the day when she will have learned anew to go down on her knees. This picture, described by a Catholic historian, is significant. It helps to understand the moves which followed, a few years later, the unsuccessful restoration attempt of 1873. The same Catholic historian describes in the following manner the political attitude of the clergy at that time. At election time, the presbyteries become center for the reactionary candidates. The priests and officiating ministers make home calls for the electoral propaganda, slander the republic and its new laws on teaching. They declare that those who vote for the freethinkers, the present government, or Freemasons described as bandits, riffraff, and thieves, are guilty of them. One declares that an adulterous woman will be forgiven more easily than those who send their children to lay schools. Another one, that it is better to strangle a child than give support to the regime. A third one, that he will refuse the last sacraments to those who vote for the regime's partisans. The threats are carried out. Republican and anti-clerical tradesmen are boycotted. Destitute people are refused any help, and workmen are dismissed. These excesses from a clergy affected more and more by Jesuitic ultramontanism are even less acceptable from the fact that they emanate from ecclesiastics paid by the government, and the Concordat is still enforced. Also, the majority of public opinion is not happy with this pressure on the consciences, as the aforementioned author writes. As we have seen, the French people as a whole is indifferent to religious matters, and we cannot mistake the hereditary observance of religious practices for a real faith. The fact is that the political map of France is identical to her religious map. We can say that in the regions where faith is strong, the French people vote for the Catholic candidates elsewhere. They consciously elect antical deputies and senators. They do not want clericalism, which is ecclesiastical authority in the matter of politics and commonly called the government of priests. For a large number of Catholics, the fact that the priest, this troublesome man, interferes through the sermons, instructions, and the confessional's prescriptions in the behavior of the faithful, checking thoughts, sentiments, acts, food and drink, and even the intimacies of married life is enough. They intend, at least, to limit his empire by preserving their independence as citizens. We would like to see the spirit of independence as lively today, but even though the opinion of that large number of Catholics was such, ultramontanes would not disarm and pursue at every opportunity the fight against the hated regime. They thought for a while that they had found the providential man in the person of General Boulanger, Minister of War in 1886, who, having organized his personal propaganda extremely well, looked like being a future dictator. A tacit agreement, wrote M. Adrien Dansett, is established between the general and the Catholics, and becomes clear during the summer. He has also concluded a secret agreement with royalist members of parliament such as Baron de Macu and Count de Mun, faithful defenders of the church at the assembly. The phlegmatic minister for the interior, Constans, threatens to arrest him, and on the 1st of April the dictator candidate escapes to Brussels with his mistress. From now on, Boulongism declines rapidly. France has not been taken, she recovers. Boulongism is crushed at the polls on the 22nd of September and 6th of October, 1889. We can read from the pen of the same historian what the attitude of the Pope of that time was regarding his adventurer. He was Louis. Is it Louis? No, it's Leo. He was Leo the 13th, who, in 1878, had succeeded Pius IX, Pope of the Syllabus, and who pretended to advise the faithful of France to join the Republican regime. In August 1889, the German ambassador to the Vatican pretends that the Pope sees in the General Boulanger the man who will overthrow the French Republic and re-establish the throne. We can read an article in which the Monsignor of Rome envisions that the dictatorial candidate will take over power and that the Church could benefit greatly from it. General Boulanger sent one of his former officers to Rome with a letter from Leo XIII, in which he promises the Pope that on the day when that on the day when he would hold his hands the sword of France, he would do his uttermost to make the rights of the papacy acknowledged. Such was this Jesuit pontiff. The intransigent clerics objected to his supposed excess of liberalism. The Boulanger crisis revealed well enough the action led by the religious party against the lay republic. Under the cover of nationalism, the colorless nature of the principal character, as well as the resistance of a majority of the nation, had defeated the attempt in spite of all this forced agitation. Nevertheless, these chauvinistic tactics had proved quite effective, especially in Paris, and they were to be used again at another and better opportunity. This came about, or was it provoked? And the disciples of Loyola were, of course, at the head of this movement. Their friends are here, wrote M. Pierre Dominique, a bigoted nobility, a bourgeoisie which rejects Voltaire and many military men. They will especially work on the army, and the result will be the famous alliance of the sword and the sprinkler of holy water. In 1890, it is the King of France's conscience they rule conscience, they rule anymore, but the general staff, or at least its chief. Then the Dreyfus affair breaks out, a real civil war which divides France in two. The Catholic historian Adrian Dansett sums up the beginning of the affair as follows. On the 22nd of December 1894, the captain of artillery Alfred Dreyfus is proved guilty of treason, condemned to deportation for life imprisonment and cashiering. 3 months earlier, our intelligence service had discovered at the Germany embassy a list of several documents to do with national defense. It established a resemblance between the writing of Captain Dreyfus and the one on that list. Immediately, the general staff cried out, "It's him, it's the Jew." They only had this presumption as to treason, had no psychological explanation. Dreyfus had a good reputation, was rich, and led an orderly life. The unfortunate man is nevertheless in prison, condemned by a military tribunal, after an inquiry so swift and partial that the judgment must have been preconceived. To make it worse, it will be learned later that a secret document was given to the judges without the knowledge of the counsel for the accused. But there was more leakage at the General Staff after Dreyfus's arrest and commandment. Piquecourt, of Chief of the Intelligence Service, after July 1895, learns of a certain project called Petit Bleu express letters between the German military attaché and the French commandant of Hungarian origin, Esterhazy. He is a disreputable man who has nothing but hatred and contempt for his country of adoption. But an officer in the intelligence service, Commandant Henry, adds to the Dreyfus file, as we shall see, a false document which be crushing for the Jewish officer if it was genuine. He also erases and rewrites the name of Esterhazy on the Petit Bleu to give the impression that the document was faked. So Piquecourt is disgraced in November 1896. The disgrace of the chief of the intelligence service is easy to understand. His zeal to dissipate accumulated darkness was too excessive. The most trustworthy testimony is found in the Carnets de Schwarzkoppen, published after his death in 1930. It was from Esterhazy and not Dreyfus that the author, then first military attaché at the German embassy in Paris, received secret documents of the French national defense. Already some time before, in July, Piquecourt thought the time had come to warn by letter the chief of the general staff, who was then in Vichy, about his suspicions concerning Esterhazy. The first meeting was on the 5th of August, 1896. General de Boissefer approved of everything Piquecourt had done so far concerning this affair and gave him the permission to carry on with his investigation. The Minister for War, General Billet, was equally informed from August about Piquecourt's suspicions. He also sanctioned the measure taken by Piquecourt. Esterhazy, whom I had dismissed and had tried, using his connections with the deputy Jules Roch, to be posted to the Ministry for War, presumably to try to get in touch with me again, and had written several letters to the Minister for War as well as to his aide-de-camp. One of his letters was given to Piquecourt, who for the first time realized that his writing was the same as the one on the list. He showed a photo of that letter to Dupaty and Berlietinen, without telling them, of course, who wrote it. Berlietinen said, "Oh, that's the writing on the list." Feeling his conviction of Dreyfus' culpability crumbling away, Piquecourt decided to consult the small file, which had been given only to the judges. The archivist, Gribelin, gave it to him. In the evening, left alone in his office, Piquecourt opened Henry's unsealed envelope, on which was Henry's paragraph written with a blue pencil. Great was his amazement when he realized the nullity of those pitiful documents, none of which could be applied to Dreyfus. For the first time he knew that the condemned man on the Île du Diable, Devil's Island, was innocent. The following day, Picacourt wrote a letter to General de Boisdreffy in which he exposed all the charges against Esterhazy and his recent discovery. When reading about the secret file, the general jumped up, exclaiming, "Why was it not burned, as agreed?" Von Schwarzenkoppen wrote further, "My position became extremely uncomfortable. This question was before me. Should I tell the whole truth and so repair the horrible mistake and liberate the poor innocent man? If I had been able to act as I wanted to, I would certainly have done just that. Looking at these things in detail, I came to the conclusion that I shouldn't get involved in that matter, for as there were, nobody would have believed me. Also, diplomatic considerations were standing in the way of such an action. Considering that the French government was able to take the necessary measurements to clear the matter and make up for the injustice, I really made up my mind not to do anything." Well, that's sad. "We can see coming to light the tactics of the General Staff," notes Adrian Dansett. "If Esterhazy is guilty, the officers who provoked the illegal condemnation of Dreyfus, and most of all General Mercier, Minister for War at that time, are guilty also. The entrance of the army required the sacrifice of Dreyfus. We must not interfere with the sentence of 1894. We remain dumbfounded today at the thought that such an argument could be invoked to justify, if we dare express ourselves so, an invidious condemnation. It was to be so all through the affair, which was then just beginning. Of course, we were then in anti-Semitic fever. The violent dissertations of Edward Drumont in the Liberal Parole showed up every day the children of Israel as agents of national corruption and dissolution. The unfavorable prejudice so created incited a large section of public opinion to believe a priori in Dreyfus's guilt. But later, when the innocence of the accused became evident, the monstrous argument of the infallibility of the military tribunal was still upheld, and from now on with a perfect cynicism. Was it the Holy Spirit inspiring these judges in uniform who could not make any mistake? It would be tempting to believe in that celestial intervention, so similar to the one which guarantees papal infallibility, when we read about Father Dulac of the Company of Jesus, who had a lot to do with the affair. He directed the college of the Rue de Postes, where the Jesuits prepared the candidates for the larger school. He is a very intelligent man with the important connections. He converted Drumont, is the confessor of Edmond and de Boisdreffy, I can't say that name, chief of the Army's General Staff, whom he sees every day. Abbe Burriget also mentions the same facts quoted by Joseph Reinhardt. Is it not this Father Dulac who converted Drumont and urged him to write the Jewish France, who applied means to create the liberal parole? Does not General de Boisdreffy see the famous Jesuit every day? The chief of the General Staff doesn't take any decisions before consulting first his director. There on Devil's Island, which deserves its name so well in that deadly climate, the victim of this atrocious plot was treated in an extremely cruel manner, as the anti-Semitic press had spread the report that he had tried to escape. The minister for the colonies, André Lebon, gave orders accordingly. On the Sunday morning, the 6th of September, the head warderer, Boer, informed his prisoner that he would not, from then on, be allowed to walk in the part of the island which had been reserved for him, and that he would be confined to his hut. In the evening he was told that he would be chained at night at the foot of his bed, made up of 3 planks, where riveted 2 double iron shackles, which encircled the convict's feet. When the nights were torrid, this punishment was especially painful. At dawn, the guards unfastened the prisoner who, when he got up, trembled on his feet. He was forbidden to leave his hut, where he had to stay day and night. In the evening he was shackled again, and this went on 40 nights. After a while his ankles were covered with blood, and they had to be bandaged. His guards, moved with compassion, secretly wrapped his feet before chaining them. Nevertheless, the convict still proclaimed his innocence. He wrote to his wife, "There must be somewhere in this beautiful and generous land of France an honest man who is courageous enough to search for and discover the truth." In fact, the truth was no longer in doubt. What was lacking was the will to let it burst forth. The Abbé Bourget testifies of the fact. The presumptions of innocence of the convict on Devil's Island multiply in vain. M. de Boulot's declarations at the Reichstag and those transmitted by M. de Munster, his ambassador to the French government, also state the innocence of Dreyfus in vain, an innocence proclaimed also by Emperor Guillemon and confirmed when Schwarzkoppen, the German military attaché, was recalled to Berlin as soon as Esterhazy was accused by Matthew Dreyfus, brother of the convict. The General Staff remains opposed to any re-examination of the trial. Someone is busy covering up for Esterhazy. Secret documents are communicated to him for his defense, and even his writings is not allowed to be compared with that on the list. Shielded in that way, the villain Esterhazy is audacious enough to ask to appear before a council of war. There he is unanimously acquitted on the 17th of January, 1898, after a deliberation lasted 3 minutes. We must mention that a few months later, when Colonel Henry was convicted of forgery, Esterhazy fled to England and in the end confessed that he was the author of the famous list attributed to Dreyfus. We cannot cite all the many happenings in this drama. The forgeries added to more forgeries in an attempt to conceal an obvious truth. The dismissal of the chief of the general staff, the downfall of ministers, the suicide of Henry, detained at Mount Valerian, who slit his throat and so signed with his own blood the confession of his culpability. In December 1898, this semi-official note was published by the German press. The declarations of the imperial government have established that no German personality, high or low, had any kind of relations with Dreyfus. Then, from the German point of view, we see no inconvenience as to the unabridged publication of the secret file. At last, the inevitable re-examination is decided by the High Court. Dreyfus has to appear again before the Council of War in Reims on the 3rd of June, 1899. It is the start of another torture for him. He could not suppose that he was to meet hatred more odious than when he left, and that his former chiefs, conspiring to set him again on the road to Devil's Island, would have no pity for this poor creature, who thought he has endured all the suffering there is to endure. So wrote the Abbé Bourget. The council of war at Reims will only add a new injustice to the iniquity of the 1894 trial. The legality of this trial, the guilt of Esterhazy, the criminal maneuvers of Henry, will come out clearly during the 29 sessions of that trial in Reims. But the council of war will judge Dreyfus on other spying charges, which never cause of an accusation or report. All the previous leakage will be attributed to him, and documents will be produced which had nothing to do with him. At last, the contrary to all legal traditions will require that Dreyfus himself establish that such a document of paper was not handed over by him, as if it was not the task of the prosecution to prove the crime any more. The partiality of Dreyfus' accusers was so obvious that public opinion outside France has aroused the semi-official Cologne Gazette, published on the 16th and 29th of August in the middle of the trial, 2 articles in which we read the following phrase: "If after the declarations of the German government and the debates of the highest court of appeal in France, someone still believes Dreyfus guilty, we can only answer that person that he must be mentally ill or be consciously wants an innocent to be condemned." But the hatred, nonsense, and fanaticism were not disarmed for all that. Even new forgeries were used, replacing those which had lost all credit. To sum it all up, it was nothing more than a sinister buffoonery. The end of it for Dreyfus was the condemnation to 10 years' detention with the mitigating circumstances. This miserable trial provoked an indignant stupor all over the world. France was despised. Who could have imagined such terrible sorrow? Explained Clemen Clemenceau at the reading of the English and German papers. Mercy was indispensable. Dreyfus accepted it to carry on, he said, seeking the reversal of the awful military mistake of which he was the victim. For this reversal it was no use counting on the justice of the Council of War. This justice had been seen at work. It came once again from the highest court of appeal, which after thorough investigations and long debates annulled once and for all the verdict of Raines. A few days later the Assembly and Senate, by a solemn vote, reinstated Dreyfus in the army, Dreyfus upon whom was conferred the Legion of Honor, and who was publicly reinstated. This late reversal, obtained so laboriously, was due to honest and courageous men, such as those the innocent on Devil's Island wished to see forthcoming. Their number grew more and more as truth came to light. After the swift acquittal of the traitor Esterhazy by a council of war in January 1898, Emile Zola published in the Aurora, Clemenceau's publication, his famous open letter. I accuse, he wrote. I accuse the First Council of War to have violated the law by condemning an accused person on the grounds of some document remaining secret, and I accuse the Second Council of War to have covered up this illegality by committing also a judicial crime, knowingly acquitting a culprit. But the knights of our famous company were on the watch out to hush up anything which could have enlightened the public. A question from the Catholic deputy by Edmond brought Zola before the Assize court of the Seine, and the courageous writer was condemned to 1 year imprisonment. Wow, the maximum penalty. That is crazy, as a result of his iniquitous trial. I am going to stop that there, only because I'm telling you what, this is a very hard book to read, and I am going to finish it by the grace of God Almighty. But I'm going to end that there for now. But that's something else. That man was done wrong, wasn't he? Very wrong. All right, brothers and sisters, keep your eyes on Jesus, your nose in the book, which is the Word of God. And embed the Word of God upon the tablets of your hearts, so you will not sin against God, be deceived. Till next time, I love you all. Bye-bye.